Hello and good morning friends, welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, as you know that we are carrying a series on gender studies, and so far we have conducted numerous sessions under this very series gender studies. Dear friends, in today's session we would be talking on gender across disciplines. Dear friends, we would like to tell you all that for the very first time we have with us in our studios Miss Inayat Chaudhary. She is academic coordinator in CEC, that is Consortium for Educational Communication, and she too is initiating and she too has put her hard work into the lecture. I believe and firmly believe that of course she is going to give her best. So without wasting any time, I would like to welcome our guest, Miss Inayat Chaudhary. Miss Inayat Chaudhary, welcome to the EdSec lecture.
Hello students, today we'll be having a discussion on gender across disciplines. In this, we will be talking about various subjects, as one can see in the upcoming slide, regarding sociology, political science, economics, history, English, and philosophy. In this session, I will be chiefly speaking about sociology and political science. So without wasting much time, let us begin. When we talk about gender in sociology, what are we trying to understand when we talk about gender in sociology? What one needs to understand is, one needs to see how gender affects sociology and how sociology in turn is affected by it. To begin with, let us discuss the differences between sex and gender. When we look at sex, what is it? Let us look at the first difference. Sex is about a biological construct, whereas when one looks at gender, it is about a societal cultural construct. Sex is internal, whereas gender is external. Of course, it is internal because it is a biological construct, and gender is external because it is a societal cultural construct. Let us come to the third difference. When we look at sex, one understands that it is difficult to change. Therefore, there is a certain constancy that is maintained when one looks at sex, whereas when we look at gender, one understands that it can be changed. What do I mean by the fact that it can be changed? One means there is a certain variation when it comes to gender. Now, sex has two main categories. These two main categories are but obvious, male and female. When one looks at gender, gender has two main categories, particularly known as the masculine and the feminine. The fifth difference which I would like to talk about is that sex remains same regardless of time and culture. Therefore, going back to the third difference, it is difficult to change, as well as it remains same regardless of time and culture. When one looks at gender, one understands that gender roles differ as per time and culture. This fifth difference is what I will be discussing about in greater depth in the upcoming slides. Let us come to the last difference. Sex is natural. Obviously, because sex is a biological construct, it is internal, hence there is a tendency of sex to be natural. When one looks at gender, it is cultural. What do I mean by cultural is what I will be discussing in the upcoming slides. Let us move forward. Now, this slide particularly speaks about what exactly sex is and how it is internal. Sex chiefly refers to physiological features confined within a human being. By that, I mean I'm talking about the reproductive organs, the hormonal profile, and chromosomes of an individual. As you can see, there is a figure of a girl and a boy depicted in the slide. The girl has XX chromosome, whereas the boy has XY chromosome. Hence, going back to the differences that I had spoken about, let us try to recall where I had said that sex is internal, and this is how sex is internal, and it is a biological construct. Now let us come to the main theme, that is gender. How is it impacting the field of sociology? So what exactly is gender? Why is it significant? And how does it come into play is what I will be talking about in depth here. Now WHO, an international organization, defines gender as socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. Now let us take an example of a child to develop a better understanding of what gender is and how I consider or we consider gender to be a societal construct. So for instance, one views an individual walking down a lane having long hair. What immediately would come to one's mind is that the certain individual is a girl. Why do we call the certain individual to be girl? Is what exactly is gender. That is, feminine attributes which are usually associated with a girl is defined by long hair, whereas masculine attributes which are usually associated with the boy is defined by short hair. Therefore, one would immediately state that the individual is a female, since the individual has feminine attributes. Now let me take another example where I would like to talk about the masculine attributes. Suppose I witness another individual wearing a blue dress. What would I think the individual to be? If the individual is wearing a blue shirt, usually the individual I would cite would be is a boy. Now why is the individual considered to be a boy? This is because the color blue usually denotes masculinity. Therefore, the individual is a boy. Now what am I trying to convey through these two examples? I am trying to convey that gender is a societal construct. It is the society which constructs gender. And this is how we as individuals define certain gender roles which establish what is feminine and what is masculine. Usually, a masculine entity is a boy and the feminine entity is a girl. Now, another important aspect that one needs to look at is that gender can be better understood through the terminology of patriarchy. What do I mean by patriarchy? Patriarchy is a very important term in sociology. By patriarchy, it means male dominance in a society. Therefore, patriarchy plays a tremendous role in the working of gender, as it helps in defining and redefining roles that make one masculine as well as feminine. Now, child is associated with certain ways of behavior, mannerism, depending upon whether the child is a girl or a boy. Therefore, one is categorized into being masculine and feminine depending on the way the child behaves, depending on the way the child acts. And what do I mean by that? By this, I am trying to convey that a boy is considered to be masculine when he is aggressive, he is loud, he is not supposed to cry, he is tough, whereas a girl is considered to be feminine when she is soft-hearted, she is gentle, she is calm and composed, as well as she is emotional. Now, these attributes is how the society categorizes one to be feminine or masculinity. Again, establishing the fact that gender is a societal as well as a cultural construct. Moving on to the next slide. Now, this lady is an important gender theorist. In a 1990 book, Gender Trouble, she created a term, gender performativity. Now, what do I mean by gender performativity? I mean that gender is a constant repetition of acts. That is, let me quote Judith Butler, we act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression of being a man or a woman. Therefore, gender is a sense of performance, a sense of repetition of acts that one witnesses through her terminology, gender performativity. Therefore, again reinforcing the idea that gender is socially constructed. Now let us move forward to the next slide and try to understand the term gender in a further better light. Now, like I spoke about certain mannerisms which categorizes an individual to be masculine and feminine, there is also a certain clothing type which I discussed in the example which categorizes an individual a certain gender type. Now, for instance, pink is usually associated with females. Similarly, bright colors are usually associated with females. However, when it comes to male members of the society, they usually can be seen abundantly wearing grays, blacks, whites, and shades of blue. Now, why is this categorization coming into play and how is it constructed? How does society construct gender? Is what I have been discussing throughout the various slides. Somewhere it is the teachers, the parents, and every individual which makes one believe and behave in a certain way. Children are segregated in a very early age to behave and believe themselves to be a male or a female. For instance, boys can be seen playing with cars, guns, and the superhero paraphernalia that can be seen surrounding them, whereas the girls can be seen playing with kitchen sets, dolls, and toys. Therefore, gender is categorized at a societal level. From the very beginning, the children are born. Now, societal living also differentiates between the two, as we have seen through the working of patriarchy, through gender discrimination. There is a sense of gender inequality, men are considered to be superior, and many more. Further, another important point is that those who attempt to disturb the gender categories are looked down upon. The recent LGBT rights is another issue which I will not be discussing here, but which categorically fits into this point that I have just made. Further, gender has no fixity. Now, this is something that I spoke about in the differences between sex and gender. What do I mean by gender has no fixity? And what am I trying to explain by using the term gender fluidity is what I will be discussing in detail in the upcoming slides. Now, gender roles differ as per time and culture. This is the exact point which I have picked up from the differences that I have spoken about when I was speaking about sex and gender. Now, through these figures, I am trying to explain that gender roles differ as per time. And how did they differ as per time? In the 16th and the 17th century, the aristocratic men wore high-heeled shoes, as one can see in the three figures that I've used in the slide. Heels represented masculinity, power, as well as status. Therefore, wearing of heels was immediately associated in being called masculine. Now let us come back to the contemporary times. Immediately, wearing of heels is considered to be feminine, whereas in those times, wearing of heels was considered to be masculine. What am I trying to show here? I am trying to show here that gender differs as per time and culture, and this particular slide talks about how gender differed as per time. This is a contrast that I have tried to establish. Whereas men during those times wore high-heeled shoes, it is only the women who usually are accustomed to wearing high-heeled shoes in contemporary times. Now let us go back to the slide and try to understand. The middle figure in the slide is of King Louis XIV of France. He was very famous for wearing high-heeled shoes. His high-heeled shoes depicted many battle scenes, again very masculine. His high-heeled shoes were also red in color. Now this red in color was again very masculine as well as representative of the aristocrats or those who followed or who supported King Louis XIV. Now in contemporary times, red is again a very feminine color. Let us move ahead. Now in this slide, I have tried to portray how gender fixity is not there, and one can see a sense of shifting of gender through the Wodhabi men. Who are these Wodhabi men? Wodhabi men were nomadic people who reside in the Sahel Desert of West Africa. The picture depicts the celebration of the tradition of Garevol, which happens once a year. Now, what am I trying to speak or convey through this picture? I am trying to convey that there is gender difference when it comes to a certain culture. Now, as one can see in the picture, the Wodhabi men appear to us particularly very feminine. What do I mean by that? Their headgear, their clothing, as well as their makeup, which is used to beautify their face, is particularly feminine. However, this way of dressing up, this way of wearing a headgear, and this way of wearing attractive makeup is very masculine for the Wodhabi men. Therefore, an important idea which is being conveyed through this is that the Wodhabi men consider themselves to be masculine, whereas in our culture, this kind of dressing up, this kind of wearing of bright makeup is completely feminine. Therefore, gender differs both in terms of time as well as in terms of culture. Let us move to the next slide. Now, who are these two figures that I am trying to show in this slide? On the right hand side is the female husband, particularly known as Nandi. Nandi people are from Western Kenya. These female husbands, I am quoting from the slide, are usually those women who are older, who never decided to marry or bear children. The wife of female husbands can bear children from any man they wish, but the social and legal father of the children will be the female husband. Now, the female husbands follow all the rules and rituals as the husband does. For instance, the rule of bride wealth. Further, they are considered to be culturally male, and there is no sexual involvement with the wife. Now, what point am I trying to make here? I am trying to say that a female husband is legally and socially married to another woman. Now, this female husband, though for us, contains within herself attributes of femininity, but she plays the role of a husband. That is, she behaves and acts in a manner that is completely masculine. Therefore, gender fluidity can be seen as per culture and as one moves across various timelines. This comparison is important to understand that gender fluidity exists even today. Now let us look at how gender witnessed a historical development in the subject of sociology. Classical sociologists like Karl Marx, Max Weber, Frederick Engels, and Emily Durkheim, though didn't primarily speak about gender, but did have spread across the various works they talk about the idea of gender. Karl Marx, I am quoting from the slide, in his work Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts, written in 1844, argued that women's position in society could be used as a measure of development of society as a whole. Similarly, the 18th and 19th century also saw various women writers who spoke about gender. Mary Wollstonecraft of 18th century and Harriet Martineau of 19th century extensively speak about women's rights. Now, 19th century also witnesses the upcoming of Chicago School of Sociology, where a dozen women like Jane Addams particularly concentrate on the idea of gender. However, it was the 20th century where Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, written in 1949, which established and formed a strong base for the extensive research which began to be done regarding gender. She is famous for the quote that one is not born a woman, but one becomes one. Therefore, gender is again a societal construct. Further, the research that is being done in the field of sociology deals with gender and femininity. In contemporary times, the research is also being done on gender and masculinity. Further, one has gone a step ahead as various researchers have now begun to look at the link between gender and class, gender and race, gender and religion, as well as gender and age. By this, I am trying to convey that gender is not a homogeneous category and it is a heterogeneous one. So this was about gender and its relation to the discipline of sociology. Now let us come to gender in political science. Now there are two aspects that I am talking about here, how gender influences polity as a discipline and how gender's working can be seen in the political sphere in our daily affairs, which forms an important theme in the discipline of gender as political science. In 1890, women had no right to vote. It was in 1893 that New Zealand became the first country to give voting rights to women, followed by Australia in 1902 and Finland in 1907, which became the first country to elect women to the parliament. Now, representation of women in politics is an important term. What do I mean by that? By that, I am trying to say that women occupy an important space when it comes to decision making. It not only gives them a sense of empowerment, but it also encourages other women and inspires them to step out into the public sphere. When one looks at historical development of gender in political science, one realizes it was only later in 1958 that gender as a unit of analysis first appeared in political science. From 1972 onwards, one could see that gender was used consistently in the voting behavior. Gradually, full-length books began to appear and a lot of research began to be done. Yet, knowledge was incomplete about women's political activities. Jane Jacquet called this field as micropolitics and feels that this is the very field, that is the politics of the family, the school and the peer group, which should be looked at when one is analyzing the position of women regarding to the public sphere. Now let us look at few of the graphs and try to understand how women have behaved in the public arena. India in fact got the right to vote in 1930 and almost a 55.82% women voted in comparison to 60.24%. Though things are now changing, there is a change in trend, yet a lot needs to be done when it comes to women empowerment in the public sphere. This slide speaks about how women have fared in the various Lok Sabhas. Though there is a tremendous improvement from 1951's 4.50% to 2014's 12.15%, yet a lot needs to be done for the representation of women in the public sphere, chiefly the various Lok Sabhas. Similarly, this slide shows that India stands at a worrisome low position, whereas a small country like Nepal occupies a higher position when it comes to women representation in the public sphere. Now this slide speaks about how India overall fares when it comes to various international organizations. And it is indeed worrisome to note the dismissal ranks that India occupies, be it the global, the Asiatic position, the SAARC position or the BRICS position. In fact, a small country like Rwanda in Africa has almost 63.8% of women's representation. Students, today's lecture, as I have discussed, was about sociology and its relation with gender and its relation to political science. In the next lecture, we'll be talking about the remaining disciplines. Till then, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
students, in today's session, we'll be talking about the other disciplines like gender and its relation to economics, gender and its relation to history, gender and its relation to English, and gender and its relation to philosophy. Now let us begin. It is important to understand how gender affects economics and how gender influences various economic decisions. For this, we need to look at the relationship between gender and the labor market. Now, the two aspects that one can look at when one is looking at the labor market are employment as well as the wages. When one talks about the employment and its relation to gender, one notices that it is the men who occupy, whether it is the higher strata or the lower strata, the majority of the jobs, whereas the women comparatively have lesser number of jobs. This can also be linked with another significant topic that I spoke about, that is the wages. A huge wage disparity can be seen where female are paid much less as compared to male members of the society. In fact, lot of times this wage disparity is so much so that in the division of labor, women are not even paid at all. This calls for restructuring and reorganization of the labor market for better results and the upgrowth of the society. One also witnesses gender discrimination in property rights. Now, this is another important aspect that one should look at when one is looking at a relation between gender in economics. What do I mean by property rights? By property rights, I am trying to convey the property which the father has and which is eventually transferred to the male heir. One should remember that in India as a country, though theoretically there are a lot of laws on the paper, yet practically it is usually the son and not the daughter who inherits the property of his father. Now, these acts, as I have mentioned, can be Married Women Property Rights Act of 1974, Hindu Succession Act of 2015. Now, let us move ahead. Another important aspect that one can look at is that it is usually the patriarchal head who makes financial decisions in the household or the daily household chores. By this, I am trying to say that women, in comparison to male members, have little or no right when it comes to financial decisions. Now, World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index ranks India at a worrisome 108 out of 145 in its 2015 readings. This indeed is a very disturbing trend. The need of the current time is improve the position of women, which will help not only in the overall growth of the nation, but will also provide a sense of economic justice, which economics as a discipline tries to convey when it looks at the theme of gender. Encouragement of aspects like sustainable development and inclusive growth is another important area which can help in the growth and the betterment of society. This is the need since now globalization and deepening of markets is taking place. Economic participation, like I discussed in the political science discipline, is also important because this representation of women helps in improving the GDP of the India as a nation, as well as helps in the reduction of poverty, because majority of the people, and in fact large number of people who are poor are chiefly women. Now let us analyze few graphs that I am trying to show. Now this graph analysis depicts the wage disparity that exists, whether it was in 2006 or 2015. As one notices, there is a difference both in the year between male and females wages, be it in any of the years. Let us come to the next graph. Here I have tried to speak about the next topic where I had spoken about employment. The global labor force, again, whether it was the year 2006 or another year 2015, which is few years ahead, still shows that there is a need of gender equality. And a sense of gender inequality is easily visible in these two graphs that I have tried to depict. So students, this was about gender in economics and how gender impacts the how gender impacts economy and economic decisions as a whole. Let us move to the next discipline, which is gender in English. Now, what do we deal with when we talk about gender in English? For this, I will be dealing with few time periods, since gender in English is spread across various timelines. So, the first time period that I will be looking at is the medieval age. Now, what am I dealing with when I talk about the medieval age? In medieval age, one notices that women's appearances, that is, the clothing she wore or the way she behaved, was different from not only the men of that period, but also the women of contemporary times. Now, what do I mean by that? I am trying to convey that women during the Middle Ages or the medieval ages wore long tunics, long fabrics which covered their entire body. After marriage, they were supposed to keep their hair or head covered, unlike the contemporary times, whereas such a tradition is restricted to only few regions in the world. Now, in the Middle Ages, women were chiefly expected to confine themselves into the domestic sphere. Public sphere participation was minimum. And this becomes clear as women was expected to play at the most the role of a nun or a family caretaker. Now, in English literature, these instances are portrayed through various works, and one such work is that of Geoffrey Chaucer, who in his Canterbury Tales chiefly speaks about it. For instance, the Nun's Tale depicts this entire appearance about women and her position in the society. Now here I have tried to show the feminine attributes which categorizes what gender is and what associates a female to be when she is immediately confined to the domestic sphere. Now let us look at the masculine attributes, the way a male is expected to behave in a society during the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, the male is supposed to have a sense of chivalry, bravery, loyalty, and a devout being. Now this is beautifully explored in the work Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Now let us move ahead to the period of Renaissance, and then I will be discussing the period of Restoration. Renaissance saw the literary giant Shakespeare, who wrote several works. Works like As You Like It, Twelfth Night, The Merchant of Venice depicts cross-dressing of heroines, therefore exploring the idea of gender fluidity which I had spoken about in the discipline of sociology through various examples. In As You Like It, Rosalind disguises herself into a man and calls herself Ganymede. Why is there a disguising being done? This is because Rosalind decides to move into the public sphere. When moving into the public sphere, a sense of masculine trait has to be adopted. Therefore, she disguises herself into being a man. This also helps in establishing how gender worked in the society of Renaissance period, where women again were expected to remain inside the private sphere, whereas male members were expected to participate actively in the public sphere. This also again brings back the issue that I had spoken about in the last session, where Judith Butler states gender to be performative. Now let us come to the period of Restoration. Restoration period was itself a political and social order of distortion. For the first time, it saw women's participation on stage, as well as there was a sense of redefining of the roles assigned to women. Women particularly became more empowered when it compared to the previous time periods. Now, masquerading was another important idea that the Restoration writers explored throughout their work. By masquerading, I mean a sense of disguise by which women could hide her identity and behave in a realistic manner that she can without any societal burden on herself. This can be seen in various works of Wycherley, Congreve and Aphra Behn. Now, Alexander Pope also explores the idea of gender. In fact, his chief protagonist, Belinda, in The Rape of the Lock is depicted as an epic heroine or an epic hero who is usually masculine. This again helps in determining that gender is fluid. Moving on to the next slide, we come to the Victorian period. This period clearly demarcated the gender roles. Women had to restrict themselves into the domestic arena. Both male and female were provided with different sets of educations. For women, she had to be an accomplished lady in various other activities. For this, she was sent to boarding schools or made to play the role of a governess. This is well explored in various works of Thomas Hardy, Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, or Charlotte Bronte. Now I will be quoting few lines from Jane Austen's work Pride and Prejudice, where Jane Austen clearly establishes what the society expects from a woman of Victorian period. Jane Austen, through the mouthpiece of arrogant Caroline Bengley, lists the skills which are needed to be a successful woman. Caroline quotes, I'm quoting from the slide here, a woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages. And besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her address, and expressions. Therefore, the Victorian period clearly demarcated the roles which a woman is expected to have. Gender then has a clear definition here, where the masculine attributes are chiefly confined to the male members of the society and the female attributes are confined to the female members of the society, as I have shown through the various works of English literary giants. So, gender in literature is a significant theme which is explored throughout the ages, various timelines, and various time periods. It also is important because gender in literature helps one to compare and contrast the position that gender had when one looks at various works written by literary writers. The plot also helps one in understanding and throwing and giving one a realistic picture of what gender is and how it comes into play during various timelines. Literary criticism, which is another part of English literature, also is of immense significance as it gives us a theoretical perspective of what gender is all about. Now let us come to another discipline, that is gender in philosophy. How does gender affect philosophy as a discipline? How does gender evolve the philosophical theories written during various timelines and time periods is what I will be discussing in the upcoming slides. Now, when one looks at gender in philosophy, one notices that it was John Locke who was among the leading philosophers who challenged the structure of patriarchy. He had stated in his work, all men by nature are equal. What did he try to convey when he was speaking about all men by nature are equal? Here he, in a sense, spoke about gender equality. Yet a lot of people who think that he did not completely portray a sense of equality cite his second treatise written by him, where he had spoken that if rule belongs to anywhere or anyone in marriage, it falls to the man's share, as he is the abler and the stronger. Yet, his views on motherhood again promote a sense of gender equality. Further, one needs to understand that John Locke was considered by many to be an anti-feminist as well as a propagator of gender equality. For this, I will be citing few examples to convey the blurring of the lines and it is left to open interpretation as to what John Locke was trying to convey. John Locke states that women is not property. However, those who feel that women is not given an equal position cite that just because he is saying that women is not property does not necessarily mean that they should be given an equal status of men, equivalent to that of men. Hence, many critics feel that by saying that women are not property, John Locke doesn't completely state that women occupy an equal position to that of men. Another important point that John Locke makes is that women have a right to raise their children in the absence of their father. This, for many, stands for gender equality. But many feel that why is it that women have a right to raise the children only in the absence of father? This is what makes many people question his sense of equality that he believes women to have. Further, it must be understood that Locke lived with Damaris Masham, a blue stocking, that is, an educated and intellectual woman. So, for those who feel that John Locke propagated a sense of equality, they feel that his staying with this lady had a considerable influence upon him in conveying a sense of gender equality. His essay concerning human understanding has been cited by various other people and critics who feel that there is no equality which he tries to portray, as the word male or man has been spoken for almost 500 times, whereas the word women and female has been spoken for a mere 6 times. Democratic versus the divine rule is another important aspect that what one can look at to state that he believed in gender neutrality, whereas the divine rule was propagated by Hobbes and Filmer. John Locke was a propagator of democratic rule, and one knows what one means by democracy, whereas the divine rule stood for the fact that men automatically are chosen by God to rule as kings. Now, though there has been enough criticism as to whether John Locke propagated equality or inequality, yet many of his steps were progressive. Further, Locke's natural subordination of women in marriage was opposed in 1700 by English philosopher Mary Astell. Let us come to a next important philosopher known as Rousseau. Rousseau, in his work Emily, identifies the gender differences on the basis of gender hierarchy in the family. Rousseau, as an individual, many feel does not completely convey a sense of gender neutrality, for he feels that it is the patriarchal family which is a natural society. Further, he feels and states in his work Emily that women and men should be given a different kind of education, thereby promoting a sense that both male and female are different from each other and therefore establishing a sense of gender inequality. Book 5 mainly depicts what the role of women is according to Rousseau. He also feels that if a woman has intelligence, strong intellectual capacities, she should not engage in it at the cost of her household duties. Therefore, for Rousseau, the chief concern is that women should reside herself into the private sphere and engaged in activities associated primarily with it. Let's move on to the next slide and notice that in the 18th and the 19th century, we had figures like Mary Wollstonecraft and J.S. Mill. When one comes to Mary Wollstonecraft, one notices that she speaks against Rousseau's dictum, which I am quoting, "The male is only a male now and again. The female is always a female." For her, women would not always remember they were women if they were allowed to acquire more understanding, therefore clearly depicting a sense of gender equality which Mary Wollstonecraft tries to portray through her writings. She speaks for women's civil rights and a sense of equality that they should have. She calls for women to be educated. She states, let me quote, "Let women share the rights and she will emulate the virtues of man." On the screen, you can see on the right hand side an important work written by her, which is a vindication of the rights of women with strictures on political and moral subject. This work had a tremendous impact in developing the field of gender in philosophy as well as various other disciplines with which this mingles. Similarly, one has J.S. Mill, who stated that societal norms, motherhood, and legal institutions such as marriage, property, destroyed women's intellectual capacities by depriving them of equal opportunities with men to develop their talents. This is an important point made by J.S. Mill as it tries to convey the inequality that exists in the society. When one moves forward to the age, which is age of enlightenment, one notices that Kant's views were also influenced from Rousseau. Kant, by Rousseau, as well as his influence of Rousseau, had a deep impact on his workings when it comes to gender. Now, he is seen both as a liberal feminist by many as well as a misogynist. Philosophies of 20th century has works written by Sigmund Freud, Simone de Beauvoir, John Rawls, which again offers us various insights and perspectives about gender and its working. So what did we understand when one looks at gender in discipline, particularly philosophy? One understands that throughout the philosophy there have been varied views when it comes to gender in philosophies, and it is open to interpretations what various philosophers were trying to convey when they were discussing about the issue of gender in philosophy. Now let us come to the next discipline, that is gender in history. Let us try to understand that gender in history is again of tremendous importance. Why? Because much like English literature, one can understand how gender evolved since the beginning of history. Studying gender in history will aid one to comprehend as to how femininity and masculinity evolved with time. Gender in history also helps one to analyze the remaining gaps that exist in gender equality. Moreover, gender in history is not just restricted to certain timelines or time periods, but also can be seen to cover various regions, various areas, and various cultures. So students, in this session I spoke about 4 disciplines and their relation to gender. In the next lecture, I will be talking about gender and its relation with various sciences and the discipline of mathematics. Thank you, students.
With this note, we would like to thank Ms. Inayat Chaudhary for giving us a very, very precious session. Dear friends, we believe that you might have liked today's session. For posting your feedbacks, you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. Very soon, this lecture is going to be uploaded on YouTube for you for your easy accessibility. So keep watching us and keep giving your feedback. We would be meeting again very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, Ms. Inayat.
Thank you.